What did I just do? All right, we're recording now. Go ahead, please, David.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the continued installment or continued talks on the 10 seed groups. Today I'll be discussing seed group 6, the workers in the field of religion. And these of course are terms that DK, Master DK, the Tibetan, had called, and he put these in several of his several of Bailey's books, particularly like Externalization of the Hierarchy and Dina, Discipleship in New Age, and it's probably peppered through some other books too, but mainly those two books. So for today's talk, some themes that I want to highlight are the concept of ethics, the concept of glamour. This is all in relation to religion, and the New World religion. And I also want you to keep in mind, since we've talked about seed groups 1 through 5, and also seed group 8. We've talked about 6 seed groups before, this being the 6th or 7th one today, I think the 7th one. And so I want you to keep in mind the interrelationship of how these seed groups are interacting with and relating to each other. My last talk in June, I'll be tying a lot of these up and making the interconnections much more directly. So seed group 6, workers in the field of religion. Centuries ago, the world's main religions were founded by great teachers who appeared for a particular culture or race in various regions of the world. Among the greatest of the teachers, of course, were the Christ and the Buddha, and thousands of other mystics, sages, and initiates of all faiths. In retrospect, their teachings have inspired all that is great in the human spirit, expressed through literature, the arts, science, philosophies, politics, healing, and untold influence in all levels of human activity. From another perspective, due to arrogance, narrow-mindedness, selfishness, and mistruths, religions have caused great wars, infighting in communities, and particularly represent division and separation. This is the opposite of what their originating founders had envisioned. From an esoteric viewpoint, the teachings of the Buddha were grounded on the principle of light, that is, light in the mind, the theme of illumination, revelation, and clarity of mind, and this can be likened to revelation of the light of the soul. The teachings of the Christ anchored the spiritual energy of divine love more firmly on earth, particularly in the heart and astral plane, and that the heart and the mind could be consciously active in outward expression of service. This is what we call, or what we know as, love wisdom. These teachings are mainly embraced in the West, but Eastern traditions acknowledge Mahayana teachings of Buddhism, which with emphasis on development of the mind of compassion. So there's a crossover between Buddhism and Christianity in the world. So with that crossover, we're talking about the potential of up to 3 billion people in incarnation, which are holding these ideas and thought forms. The Christ also represented the path of initiation and showed humanity the principle of divinity is innate in every man and women. People of the major religions make up over 80% of the world's population. This constitutes a major influence that they carry with them wherever they go. Many religious leaders of these faiths are seeking to find common ground and align with universal spiritual values through education, dialogue, and service. From an esoteric viewpoint, man's consciousness around religion is influenced with the motivation to express himself through devotion and or idealism. These are 2 main driving forces. This would be devotion to a person, to a cause, or carrying out an ideal. These 2 forces or energies help with the developing of the mental and the astral bodies. Although there are notable differences between religions, many workers within these religious groups today choose instead to emphasize unity and the fellowship of spirit working out in their local communities and the world. This is a work embracing loving synthesis and how culture or society chooses to support and express the life and spirit within. Eventually, their work will provide a universal platform for the foundation of the new world religion. Perhaps this new religion will show the common roots from the majority of religions of today. The ageless wisdom calls it the new world religion, but in fact, it represents right spiritual living guided by a soul-driven awareness through practiced love, wisdom, goodwill, and harmlessness in all of life's activities. The activities of these service workers generates a great cohesion within the community and contributes toward building bridges of understanding and fostering mutual support or mutual respect now and into the future. Members of this group are bringing together the energies of love and wisdom in their experience or in their expression as they express in the following ways. They express through the ecumenical and interfaith groups that make up members of the Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Islamic, Hindu, and many other groups. For this inner spiritual work, they acknowledge the common ideas they share. And their work is a demonstration of the fact of the Spirit of God existing both transcendent and eminent. The Parliament of World Religions. It had its first meeting in Chicago of 1893 at the Columbian Exposition, Chicago. Their objective was to create a global dialogue of faiths. When they came together or are coming together, the Parliament still meets. There are members from diverse religious faiths who celebrate, discuss, and explore how religious traditions can work together on critical issues which confront the world. In 1993, they created a document called Towards a Global Ethic, an initial declaration. It details ethical commitments shared by many of the world's religious, spiritual, and cultural traditions around the world. And two principles of this document emphasize that you wish to be done to yourself as you do to others. And the second declaration or principle is that every human being must be treated humanely. A higher objective of the religious workers would be to operate through the mode of transcendental occultism. From externalization of the hierarchy, GK says this will demonstrate the divine quality of the forces in nature and humanity and the correct methods for using these forces by humanity for divine purposes. These workers could work with Seed Group 7, the scientific servers, and other seed groups to understand the basics of how energy and force interact in our world through people and the environment. Another group of workers will demonstrate that humanity as a whole is a complete expression of divinity. When the divine nature, God immanent and God transcendent, are both known individually and at the group level, the approach between humanity and the planetary hierarchy would be made much easier. And I'll discuss all of these concepts later in this talk. Religion and the mysteries. Mystery schools and societies in ancient times were religious and philosophic places of learning to protect and teach knowledge of natural and spiritual laws. Their teachers understood that this knowledge was so powerful that it could either benefit or harm mankind. Mystery schools existed in ancient Egypt, Persia, ancient Great Britain, and with the Essenes in Palestine. Although there's no archaeological proof, many esotericists believe that the ancient truths actually originated in ancient Atlantis. As a result, the most advanced knowledge was kept secret until it could be assured that disciples would use the knowledge only for the good of mankind. Practically up to the publication of the Secret Doctrine in 1888, the knowledge of the mysteries was kept from world culture. Now, with the perpetuation of knowledge and information globally, it is now largely available to the general public. In Manly Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which Francis Donald teaches monthly, the mysteries are also detailed. As many of you know, and you can see all of Francis Donald's talks, or hear all of his talks on Makara, of course. The ancient wisdom present in major religions. The Eastern religions, basically Hinduism and Buddhism, there's others, but I'm just bringing the major ones out. Both religions emphasize the concept of oneness, that God is everything, God is everywhere, and there's doctrines of reincarnation, karma, spiritual development, and purification of body and mind, and the scientific practice of meditation. That was taught by Yogananda, this meditation as a science. For Judaism and Islam, there's an emphasis on recognizing of one God and not lesser gods. That is, there's no idols that should be worshipped. And that the observing of God's laws should be applied as a way of life, both taught and contacting heavenly hosts, that this is an acknowledgement of the hierarchy and guides, the heavenly hosts being acknowledged as guides and hierarchy. For Christianity, the doctrines or teachings on reincarnation and of the hierarchy are part of Christianity too, such as from the book of Revelation, the emphasis on God is love, and that man's soul has the potential to express God-like qualities. Key teachings common to mystery schools were the source of information for founding the major religions and establishing the ageless wisdom. Some of the key teachings were that there is one God that's omnipresent, that is present everywhere at the same time, and omniscient, and that is all-knowing. Another key teaching would be worship was done through rituals, dancing, chanting, and music, often around annual festivals of summer and winter. The greater mysteries emphasize methods and advanced techniques attaining spiritual development and knowledge of spiritual laws and how to apply them. There was an emphasis on connecting with the soul and learning to overcome or control desire and live a moral life. Also, through special practices and techniques and meditation, these will help the disciple or aspirant to advance on the spiritual path. The ageless wisdom is the knowledge and wisdom that ties together the teachings of the mystics, the world's religions, and the mystery schools. Through each of them runs a thread of common teachings or truths, although many of the truths over time have become obscured, misunderstood, and misinterpreted. Each religion reflects a similar emphasis on emotional and intellectual development. Seen in daily conversations, worship services, teachings and materials, and other group meetings, it's the emotional intellectual development is also seen through a devotional path to salvation where possible, through the intellectual acquisition of knowledge, and it leads to a union with God. Probably not until the last 150 years or so has the three major spiritual paths been really defined. That is the path of devotion, the path of knowledge, and the path of service. For the coming esoteric schools, presumably founded after the Christ reappears and or the externalization of the hierarchy, the core teachings of an esoteric school for the future might teach of what I outlined this in Seed Group 4, the talk in December on Educators in the New Age, and you can find that one in Makara. So I put out basically some detailed aspects of what an esoteric school might entail. Are there any questions or comments at this point?
I don't see any yet.
All right. Let's keep going then. Embodying spiritual values. Those who embody and express the light of the soul can be known as messengers of light, the New Group of World Servers or service workers. Through their expression of light, they radiate the highest essence of what a spiritually centered life offers. Billions of people see and acknowledge the Christ and the Buddha as the primary models for exhibiting the highest spiritual values that individuals and groups can become. But it should be said that the hard work of establishing the pathways in human consciousness on the inner planes was established long ago by the masters, the initiates, the Buddha, and the Christ. This made the path much easier for achieving liberation. The great ones, or the hierarchy, became their true and enlightened selves because they pushed through limitations in their own consciousness, which resulted in greater vision as to what the path is and who we really are as human beings. Because of their spiritual achievements, their legacy remains with us through their teachings, through an exemplary life, and through their life stories. When we study their lives and teachings, we see how they transcended the limitations of the lower planes and freed themselves to become models of human behavior par excellence. From a point of ethics, spiritual values, and actions of an individual or group, this is the best way to live and conduct oneself morally in life. As esotericists, we see values as subtle energies that influence an individual's behavior. On a secular or worldly level, values act as a moral or ethical code that are adopted and applied with people and social situations. Servers employing higher spiritual values will typically be motivated and guided by cooperation, goodwill, compassion, tolerance, inclusion, sense of personal responsibility, sense of social justice, dispassion, harmlessness, selflessness, impersonality, sharing, and giving. That's a mouthful, of course, but that's something to strive for, of course. We note that service workers never impose or force their will or values on anyone or groups. Since higher spiritual values are a natural expression of who they are as living souls, people understand this idea by their example, by extension, their radiation, or their livingness. With the externalization of the hierarchy, they will establish the new esoteric schools. With the coming of these schools, their teachings will help train disciples in living the ethical life while embodying spiritual values. They in turn will train the thinkers of the race, who will in turn develop a new culture with these stated values at the core of all spiritual teachings. For average humanity, our youth will be trained in right thought form building, understanding who they are as human beings and souls, and how to use their mind efficiently, selflessly, and harmlessly to build the new civilization. This will enable all people to be exposed to higher spiritual values, and so they can become a natural and healthy part of our educational, political, and social discourse. So again, please reference back my two talks the previous 2 months on the political connection, that is how education can fit in there too, and also my seed group 4 talk on education back in December, where I talk in much more detail about how the youth can be trained with working with higher ethical values and spiritual teachings.
David?
Yes.
Excuse me. Astro wants to know, what do the 3rd and 6th symbols represent?
Oh, the 3rd symbol, it looks like E equals MC squared. That's probably having to do with the developing of the mind and the intellect. And the 6th, I believe, let's see, 1, 2, 3. The 6th, I think, is a symbol of Buddhism. There's a name for that symbol, which I can't think of what it is right now. If somebody knows, put it in the chat. But I believe that's a symbol for Buddhism. It represents, I believe, some of the branches of Buddhism. So To sum up these core values and teachings, looking at them from the broad perspective, this furthers the progress of civilization and ultimately eliminates crime and violence and corruption so rampant in the world today. It is what we see as service workers we should always be practicing and aspiring to become, as we ourselves are examples to others through the teachings we embrace and become. And it is also the service worker who must practice the will to good, and in being the example, ultimately will enable others, individuals, and the masses to learn to practice it too. So we need to become the examples here for the concepts of cooperation and goodwill and compassion, etc. Any other comments or questions?
Not at this time.
All right. Spirituality and the coming New World religion. The majority of the world's religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and others, already have a common belief in a supreme being. I left out Buddhism because they don't have a belief in a supreme being. Although invoked and called by different names, people of all nations can begin to recognize the awakening factual realization of brotherhood of man and that everyone is part of one humanity. This awareness will allow people to see the divine in all things and themselves. It will cause communities to come together and ultimately will end conflicts. Through this understanding, humanity as a whole will come to be seen as a complete expression of divinity. This, of course, is an ideal and the reality we must continually work towards. A new presentation.
David,
Yes.
oops, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Tanya says that the third symbol is also related to Einstein's formula on energy, and the sixth is indeed a symbol of Buddhism, representing interdependence or union of all forms of manifestation.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. A new presentation of truth towards what deity is and means to people is the understanding that God is ever accessible and requires no intermediaries. This is a notion that God can be accessed in two ways. That is, as transcendent. For the Western faiths, God is seen as outside and as an onlooker and performing good actions and deeds. Through this idea, God is seen in nature as the soul of a person, tribe, or nation, is also seen through the action of a perfected God man too, divine God man. Also, this can be through transcendence, transcendence. The individual is capable of connecting with deity through the higher planes, presumably through meditation and devotional practices. God eminent for the Eastern faiths is the recognition that the Spirit of God pervades all people and created forms. That is, it is present in our awareness. And this is more aligned toward what the Buddhists work with in consciousness, in their meditation. A new world religion would revolve around man's desire to understand the divine life by subjectively approaching and seeing an at one-ment with it. This refers to an existing relationship with the inner planes where man, through his invocations, seeks solace, guidance, and understanding for life's problems. This understanding provides further opportunities for those actively seeking to establish better understanding of the nature of the subjective realms, the nature of consciousness, immortality of the soul, the presence of the great ones, and our relation to them. These ideals would become an important part of the public and spiritual education to show how we are all connected on the inner and the outer planes. A new world religion, the new world religion, or a new world theology will be founded upon the following essential truths. Concept of spiritual freedom, leading to freedom of thought and allowing man to discover the guidance of his own soul and the freedom to worship or not as one chooses. Spiritual love, leading to goodwill, the realization of brotherhood of man, and right human relations expressed through sharing and service. Unity and fellowship of spirit. In the world of spirit, we are all equals, identical, and have an unbreakable bond with each other. The New World Religion will address this commonality and will unite people beyond the point of separation. The fact of the path of God and spiritual liberation leads people to realize there is a path and approach to an at-one-ment with God. This is the path of evolution, which is accomplished through aspiration, and the path of discipleship culminating in, with initiation. This path allows man to fulfill his spiritual destiny. We have the fact of God eminent. For centuries, God has been taught as being transcendent, but now recognize that the Spirit of God pervades all people and created forms. This will result in knowingness by the faithful and seekers that God is both transcendent and immanent in all objects and living beings. We have the fact of immortality and the eternal life of the soul from experience to experience, from life to life on the path of evolution, progressively integrating attained divine attributes. The process of initiation will be recognized as a process of human spiritual evolution. One of the essential truths of the New World Religion is about the Christ and the hierarchy of the masters and the initiates. They will be recognized as great mentors and guides for humanity. There will be a recognition that they are immanent and through the intuition are always present in our inner planes for support. There'll be a factual acknowledgement of brotherhood. Right human relations will be acknowledged by humanity as a significant step towards the manifestation and realization of brotherhood. Right relationship, loving understanding, and actively expressed love will become a natural expression of an inner unity. There'll be the concept of divine approaches. This is the continuity of revelation. History of humanity or mankind is in reality the history of man's demand for light, for contact with God to man. Divine approach will be through the developing science of invocation. This will take place through prayer and worship. Man will consciously call on or invoke an eminent God, and a reciprocal response or evocation will respond or result. The work of invocation will increase the power of group work, and this will lead to sacred festivals and ceremonies to be observed around the world. Examples of divine approaches can be around full moon and spring spiritual festivals, where it is recognized how hierarchy comes closer to humanity. These approaches are between mankind and the great spiritual centers, Shambhala and hierarchy carried out through the New Global World service groups, and service workers, and in the three worlds of human evolution by people who act as intermediaries between hierarchy, the ashrams, and the subjective realms. Also, the New World Religion will be built around many groups working in cooperation with religious communities because they see commonalities and principles which demonstrate their harmony. Through the law of synthesis, new social orders, networks, and relationships are being established in the economic, political, scientific, and religious fields. This impacts how people relate to each other and provide an opportunity for the practice of right human relations, a foundational teaching of the New World Religion. With all these connections, workers in these seed groups provide cohesion and understanding through both heart and mind. And through religious networks, they're already displaying vision, values, and they are justice-based. This is already existing. Everyday people can come together to discuss commonality instead of what divides them. This has already been happening since at least the 1950s through the work of citizen diplomacy. This is people-to-people programs aimed at building understanding across borders. It is the ideal that right relationship exists within each individual at the level of body, mind, and spirit. Here, the energy of synthesis is about fostering mutual understanding overtly and subjectively toward all races and ethnic groups. And esoterically, we can see this as bringing the pairs of opposites into synthetic relationship. And these are all qualities and potential truths that can be embraced for the New World religion. Any comments or questions?
No, I don't see anything at this time.
Okay, moving on. How the sixth ray influences religion. So what is the nature of the sixth ray? It has been with humanity for over 2,000 years and will be with us for hundreds of years more into the future. It has the potential of stimulating spiritual aspiration in humanity and bringing a vision of divinity. The radiation of this ray has influenced human awareness as a yearning for connecting with our highest spiritual nature and embracing the greater light within. Souls who are moved by this ray are inclined toward the energies of devotion and idealism and recognize that these can move mankind into a higher spiritual realization. For them, the path to enlightenment is also the path of devotion and idealism and in the letting go of human desire. Here, the energy of desire is recognized as an impediment or glamour that prevents one from evolving to a higher understanding and expression of the soul's wisdom. The sixth ray conditions and influences man's consciousness basically through two qualities: devotion and universal idealism. We'll talk about devotion first. Devotion defined is a fixed attention or an affection or admiration that is focused on an individual for carrying out an ideal. The question at hand is to whether the individual's consciousness is lost in that energy or not. This can be a question of glamour, which we'll explore shortly. In the Ageless Wisdom teachings, a mystic is an individual who is at a certain stage of evolutionary development, who aspires and who senses divine realities through aspiration, devotion on the emotional levels. His or her life is characterized by a sincere devotion through prayer and worship. The mystic is able to sense the higher truths, such as through the intuition or the meditation, but not necessarily know how or to understand how to return to reconnect with that higher energy. The path of the mystic is different from that of the esotericist, who is consciously aware of the world of energies and forces that make up the subjective reality. The path of the mystic precedes the path of esotericism and can lead the aspirant to achieving the first initiation. Nearing the end of the path of the mystic, he, the aspirant, will begin to yearn for knowledge about the forces and energies that influence him. He will be drawn onto the probationary path, and after a measure of purification, he will take the first initiation. This is where the majority of humanity is now in evolution. The higher expression of devotion is aspiration, where the personality wishes to consciously connect with the soul. Now let's talk about universal idealism of soul and spirit. It has existed since the sixth ray began influencing humanity over 2,000 years ago. Idealism is the sensing of an idea from the higher planes, which, when intuited through impression, is concretized into an ideal or thought form. It is the manifestation of glamours that veil and block the full experience and implementation of a higher sensed ideal. It is generated at the soul level as group awareness and brotherhood as an ideal. Through aspiration from the soul, the personality, through multiple incarnations, faintly senses the pull of the soul to evolve. This inspiration allows the aspirant personality to eventually evolve into the disciple and initiate to ultimately connect with the monad. A good example of a political idealist from history would be Woodrow Wilson during World War I. His sense of political idealism was to put forward a set of ideals, principles, values, and goals into the League of Nations. But it was not necessarily based on concrete realities or agreed upon norms. His idealism represented the world to the world as he would like to see it, instead of the present state of the world in 1919 or 1920. In the arts, for example, we see universal idealism represented as affirming the imagination, and it attempts to realize a mental conception of beauty, a standard of perfection as compared with the aesthetic naturalism and realism. In Jaina 2, GK comments, a major step toward helping humanity to focus the energies of devotion and idealism will be with the reappearance of the great Lord, who will act as the lens through which light can be focused and adapted to human need. This vision, of course, is most notably flowing through those world servers who are working with the sixth seed group in the field of religion. I came across an interesting Google quote, which I want to share with you here. And they defined idealism and how the mind worked together. Google came up with this definition saying, objects do not exist entirely apart from the mind because the mind shapes them. It is not the world that shapes the mind, but the mind that gives reason to the world. So the mind alone is the source for all reason, having an inner light, an innate moral goodness, and understanding of what is good. For us esotericists, we think energy follows thought. Any comments to this point?
Nope, sorry.
No worries. Clamors impacting religious workers. Looking back on world history in the past 100 years or so, you don't have to look too far to see the influence of the sixth ray energy playing out on unsuspecting humanity. In today's world, the glamours of the sixth ray are represented through extreme idealism, fanaticism, expressed separatism, and devotion. These are all playing out on the world stage through political, social, and religious groups. When we use the term glamour in an esoteric context, we usually understand it to be a deception in the emotional astral body, particularly when it is coupled with a thought form. It could also be extended to someone who is glamored in the materialistic sense too, such as through over shopping or succumbing to desire in whatever form of desire, such as through food or the purchase of some item that he or she really did not need. The Tibetan warned us that a religious war is a war we must not have. To go on to another theme, this is also something that Michael Robbins talked about many times over many conferences too. Many of you will recognize or remember. But since World War II, there's numerous indications that a religious war has indeed been happening. Regardless of your political or religious persuasion, there's a strong vibration of fundamentalism and religious fervor in the world. For Christianity, many individuals and groups are driving politics in the United States with religious views that abortion is against God's law, or that we must fight and go on against Islamic extremists. For Islam, religious fanatics continue to drive the Syrian civil war, pitting sects of Islam against each other, Sunni versus Muslim, Sunni versus Shiite. The Chinese wage a policy of forced sterilization and labor on the Islamic minority, the Uyghurs, I believe that's pronounced. There's anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim behavior around the world. These groups are exploited for largely political purposes. In the last 50 plus years, we've seen a considerable uptick in religious fervor erupt from radical elements of the Islamic faith who have been involved in wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Looking at this from an esoteric point of view, these are individuals that have strong proclivities toward extreme idealism and fanaticism. That is, they are glamours. The glamour of religious fanaticism gives a leader of a community or nation the right to act from a moral authority based on his or her good versus evil interpretation as a justification for going to war or attacking other people or causes. Note that going to war is not just an activity in the physical sense or on the physical plane, but it first happens on the subjective planes as a thought form. To the people that perpetrate war, the war is black and white, as they tend to divide the world into separate camps, one pitted against the other, and the need to tame that entity which is not in step with his or her version of morality. And that causes a pretext for war. Those individuals who are driven by sixth-grade personality tendencies and by lower desire that promotes religious fanaticism in the extreme, this is a glamour of this ray. In essence, this is taking a thought form and manipulating it for selfish ends. I'll discuss the idea in more detail shortly. Another point to emphasize is the responsibility of the religious community in combination with the politicians, see Group 5, to stand united in condemning acts of extremism, such as violence and hatred against minority groups, such as Jews and Muslims. In Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1, GK states, Christianity is primarily a religion of cleavage, demonstrating to man his duality and so laying the foundation for future unity. Through the lens of an illumined mind, man will see aspects of divinity hitherto unknown. This is a statement which could also apply to the major religions in their quest for bringing forth unity and brotherhood. Now, the concept of narrow idealism. The glamour of narrow idealism arises when a limited version of idealism is confined or distorted towards selfish ends. This narrow focus blocks higher ideas and impressions from the soul or the masters. This glamour blocks the ideas so that it cannot be perceived and allowed to flourish, such as the glamour of deception and illusion are the result. A chief tenet of the glamour of the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faiths is the patriarchal notion that men should dominate and control all religions, all religious teaching, and that women should be in subservient roles. Although this mindset has dominated for centuries, there is evidence that the power of these individuals is losing its hold and becoming more tolerant. Although there is much work to be done in accepting women as equals in religious guidance and teaching. In the secular world, historic examples of individuals who are or were driven by narrow idealism, such as through the abuse of power, political or religious, and glamour, and this would be seen through in history through numerous popes and Islamic clerics who drove decisions to initiate holy wars, crusades, and jihad against their enemies. Both subtly and overtly, this is still happening in today's world. For example, the Iraq War of 2003, we saw the Jews and how they treat the Palestinians, or the Israelis that treat the Palestinians. We see radical Islamic elements against Jews in Israel. The concept of narrow idealism. We saw this in 1938 with Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, and his concept of peace in our time. And it turned out to be a glamour and a deception. Currently in the United States, sixth-ray types are undermining democracy after the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the US Capitol building. Here, these insurrectionists are holding a narrow and distorted view of what they think democracy should be. And there's also, regarding a narrow idealism, there's a concept of political sectarianism, or the opposition to each other's platform or ideas to the point of gridlock, such as in government. In the United States, this is represented through conservative versus liberal ideas, and they can't agree or come to an agreement. So therefore, there's gridlock, or we can't agree, so we drop the legislation. In the social fabric of society, narrow idealism is represented in Facebook, with the ideal of making money at the expense of truth and what's best for the public. And we saw this basically back in the previous presidential administration, where Facebook used their platform for allowing the previous president and representatives of a certain political party to come to power, even though that there was lies and deception that they were putting out just so they could make money through advertising. So in their exact example, they were not denouncing violence or terrorism and deception. And through this, they were weakening the fabric of democracy. So these are all glamours that need to be addressed. Any comments or insights?
Nope, not at this time. Everybody is glued to their seat.
As typical, I will confess that I put out a tremendous amount of information, very complex, very condensed. And so if you want to hear these talks again and get more of the essence of what I'm talking about, please feel free to go to Makara and download it and listen to it at your leisure. The next subject I want to talk about in relation to the religious workers is right thought form building. For the soul-connected individual, this individual determines which thoughts are appropriate for the situation or occasion and knows how to impose a higher rhythm to register clear and accurate thoughts. By holding and vitalizing the thought form, this person or individual attains higher spiritual objective and thus transforms or influences conditions on the physical plane. In this, we find that aspirants prior to the probationary path create thoughts based on their own desires and emotional needs, and they act from those desires. Later, after the disciple learns what responsible speech and action can be, he learns to align his mind and thoughts with the soul as he is stimulated with impression and soul urge. This allows his lower mind to be driven by the soul as he learns to be mentally responsive and not emotionally reactive to people and situations. The disciple knows he must establish a relationship between the lower mind and the higher mind. He does this by becoming sensitive to impression from the soul and concentrating on the actual building of the thought form. After the thought form is constructed, he will need to know how to send it out, perhaps through right communication and speech. This person then becomes a white magician in thought form building as his thoughts are consciously directed. Aspirants and disciples should be working or removing any glamours that prevent and block clear soul contact. Regarding the transformation of thought, there's an old esoteric axiom called energy follows thought. This means that whatever you focus on or whatever direction your mind goes, so will be the direction of your thinking. If you're thinking of, I want so-and-so or X for my own self, I want this object or whatever for myself, then these thoughts in combination with the will and desire will drive you to carry out this task, regardless of whether you create karma for yourself. In short, you bring life and vitality to your thoughts. When aligning your mind with the soul, you eventually are training the lower mind to become more in line with the soul and therefore become soul infused. Here, the light of the soul as an energy is transforming your thoughts, so you become a conscious creator in thought form building. So you should ask yourself, what is my motivation when creating thoughts in any action that I perform? The esotericist is one who is aware of forces and energies in the environment, that is, the physical environment and subjectively. He knows and understands the appropriate use of mind is for creating thought forms for carrying out the soul's purpose and not for selfish needs of the separated personality. It is this soul-driven mindset that allows him to know that he should never force himself on others while engaging in any activity. Science of contact. There are three sciences which are equally interdependent and are related to the art of responsiveness and thought form building. They are, number one, the science of impression. Here, the disciple has a relationship to the spiritual triad and through the abstract mind. When the disciples clear away glamours and illusion, their connection with the spiritual triad will enable purification of the lower vehicles and allow for clear seeing and contact. There's also the science of invocation and evocation. This is the conscious invoking of thought form energy into the world through the inner and the outer planes. And there's the science of telepathy, the conscious means of contact between masters and disciples of the mind, of the personality, conscious means of contact between the master and disciples to the mind of the personality via the abstract mind. Together, these act as transmitters of group interrelationship and circulation of the thoughts and force energies. To practice right thought form building, the disciple leaders in seed groups, or even they may not be part of a seed group, but they can be in society, regardless of culture again. They must purify and put aside lower desires to the point of where they do not inhibit clear seeing. Esoterically, this involves moving the energy from the second and fourth chakras up to the fifth chakra, where right speech would be the result. Also seeing with the opening of the third eye, the sixth chakra, this allows the disciple to ascertain higher vision and impulses. These impulses are emanating from the soul or the Buddhic plane. Thoughts can be focused through mantras, formulas, and words of power in meditation. Note that a seed thought or an idea can be put out by an enlightened thinker. This thought could be picked up by, say, the seed group 1, the telepathic communicators, who would interpret it and shape it in how it could be presented to the public as a new perspective and way of thinking on a given subject. We saw examples of this in the United States by getting the public, quote, on board for supporting climate change legislation, or positively responding to the COVID-19 crisis nationally and internationally. On the negative side, we observed at the end of World War I, the mean-spirited attitude of diplomatic efforts of Lloyd George and Clemenceau. They punished Germany and strongly contributed to the rise of Hitler and the coming of World War II. In today's world, Russia and China are both posturing and using physical and mental energies to intimidate nations around the world. Theirs is a dangerous game of wrong thought form building and application. So in essence, right thought form building ideally is done with the disciple's consciousness connected with the soul, and you're basically purifying your thoughts as you're creating your thoughts. I care to go do service and perform harmless activities with other people. Whereas if you're not in meditation and you're not practicing the higher ideals of the soul, then you're doing this for selfish means, and let's just say you're doing things of destructive means, such as what Russia is doing with Ukraine right now. This is an example, an outstanding example of right thought form building. Any comments or questions?
Nope, it's quiet right now.
All right. Redemption and reorientation. Now, I don't know if people can see my, can you see my cursor moving on the screen?
Yes.
You can, excellent,
Yes.
good, okay. So the concept of redemption and reorientation is in reality a spiritual knowledge that could apply to any one individual and as part of any seed group. I'm including this here as religious workers seem most connected to exploring and holding the higher places in the expression of their work. The concept of reorientation and redemption. We understand that the religious workers, Seed Group 6, they work not just in their own community, but also influence many people and groups across all society. In the early stages of the path of liberation, the soul desires the personality to grow. It acts as an intermediary for redeeming or purifying the lower astral mental matter of the lower three vehicles of the personality. So we see right here, these are the lower 18 subplanes right here. And this actually goes down only to the astral, but we're talking about approximately from here on down is 18 subplanes. And those are the ones most subjected to glamour and desire and abuse of the energy of will. Due to the soul's urging or through impression, the aspirant will learn to self-control over the emotions and replace the lower astral tendencies with the higher corresponding soul virtues. This process begins on the probationary path, initially through impressions from the soul. So again, what we're talking about on the path of liberation, the probationary path of liberation going forward, the aspirant is connecting with the soul here through the lower mind, through meditation. The soul symbolically is the triangle here. He or she connects through the abstract mind and ideally later connects with the spiritual triad. And when they connect with the spiritual triad, or at least the soul, they're replacing lower astral energies, tendencies of selfishness and intolerance and separation, etc. These are replaced with the higher energies of tolerance, understanding, cooperation, and goodwill. So this is the replacement that's going on subtle levels. So by connecting with or invoking that higher energy from the spiritual triad, the actual connection would replace the corresponding lower energy substance, as I mentioned, where the buddhi is replacing the buddhi on the plane of intuition is ultimately replacing the astral energies. So the astral body is being upgraded with buddhi, pure reason ensues ultimately. The individual learns to think of redemption as a process and to be guided by the soul, and it repatterns the personality in his thinking and feeling. Through redemption, the general consciousness of the individual expands, and harmony and stabilization are the result. Mental and physical etheric forms in the chakra system and the nadis are nourished, and the soul light of substance. This individual would be naturally inclined toward practicing ethical living, harmlessness, and right human relations in his thought and activities. For those who achieve this or are working on this, they will be more open to receiving impressions from the masters, the initiates, and the guides. When the individual clears away the path for others, the impressions on their part in manifesting the plan, so they can be intuited and defined with a clearer mind, and they can pass this on to whatever group they're working with. Perhaps they're writers, they're communicators in some form, and they're passing this out to society and upgrading society in that way on subtle levels. With a clearer astral and mental body, individuals and groups who make up all the seed groups at the national and international level can help foster greater unity among governments, economies, political structures, and NGOs through all facets of life. And they set the foundations for peace and conflict resolution. These are major themes. The actions of this Seed Group 6, the religious workers, would involve neutralizing all forms to do violence and war and stop the sales of weaponry. In essence, it would be neutralizing crime worldwide, in short, establishing a stable peace. With a lasting peace in place, an initial result would be individuals and communities It would help individuals to see how to help each other and to see how vast amounts of monies can be made available from governments, wealthy donors, or philanthropists who will respond to natural disasters or immediate community needs and tackling humanity's most intractable problems. And through redemption and reorientation, glamour is tackled, and it can be thought of as a process that removes glamour as an illusion in the astral body. And of course, it depends on the individual, how committed he or she is to spiritual purification and raising up and transforming the lower mental and astral matter. Any comments or questions?
Nope.
All right. Enabling the first initiation. Among some of the major tasks or main tasks for the members of the religious group is to demonstrate right living through selfless love. This is an ideal, but to achieve this, the individual must purify and remove blockages, that is glamours, of anything that keeps him or her from direct experience of their soul and purpose. The Ageless Wisdom teachings demonstrate that those who tread the path of liberation will grow spiritually through inner transformation. This process is called initiation. There's 5 initiations to pass through to become a master of the wisdom. For our discussion here, we'll only be talking about the first initiation. I believe in one of my handouts I gave back in one of the previous seed groups, I gave a talk on the different initiations. You can find that on the Makara website under the category of subjective influences through the 10 seed groups. You'll find the different handouts there too. Keep in mind that initiation is also related to the concept of redemption, that is, replacing the lower astral matter of the etheric body with the energies from Buddhi, or at least from the soul. When an individual takes the first initiation, he or she replaces approximately 25% of the lower 18 subplane matter. This is at the etheric and chakra level. Nearing the end of the path of the mystic, the aspirant will begin to yearn for knowledge about the forces and energies that influence him or her. This will draw him onto the probationary path, and after a measure of purification, he will take the first initiation. Some major characteristics of the first initiation are: it signifies the birth of the Christ spirit in the heart and the individual's consciousness. His heart center becomes vivified, thus creating sensitivity to the Christ force of love and compassion. It represents a conscious commitment to practicing love and wisdom in his life. The concept of selfless love becomes dominating force in his personality as he seeks to perform service and uplift humanity through all that he does. First initiation helps to indicate that he's creating a bridge or an antakarana between the lower mind of the personality and the higher mind of the soul. And it is now being built. He learns to work as an esotericist by demonstrating his ability to understand and work with energies and forces, such as learning right thought form building as they interact in his mind and release blockages. This bridge, antakarana, is allowing the lower mind to be redeemed and to be uplifted by Buddhi. Remember, the antakarana is being constructed through, basically through the soul, through the abstract mind, connecting with the spiritual triad. And it's basically there that the connection of Buddhi comes through the antakarana and connects with the higher mind of the soul, and ultimately down to the concrete mind of the personality. A spiritual worker becomes part of an ashram when beginning the probationary path. However, he's not considered trusted in the eyes of the ashram until he's attained a measure of purification of his personality and he has become harmless. Later, after the first initiation, the group's sensitivity allows the disciple to be closer to the heart of the group and to act on its ideas and impressions. It should be said that the hierarchy does not consider the first initiation as a major initiation, but the master and the ashram of which he is affiliated, he or she is affiliated, takes notice. Since the individual's aura has a measure of soul infusion, he is now a person with whom impression can be sent and registered. At this time, there's a transfer of energy from the sacral to the throat center. This is a major concept. So you're taking the energies of, if you were not meditator at all, if you were not an esotericist, whatever, and you just simply says, I'm just average humanity, I use my aggressive forces, my aggressive energies coming from my second chakra, perhaps even sacral center, or first center, and then I'm just going to express my will any way I want. Well, when you start balancing that out, moving into the fifth chakra, then you start balancing those energies. As an observation, in the last 50 years or more, we have seen examples of many people in the entertainment industry providing a setting for presenting higher spiritually oriented ideas. We have seen concerts and artists who are very popular around the world whose artistry is strongly expressed through using the second, fourth, and fifth centers, energy centers, or chakras. A strong upsurge in spiritual expression of the arts is seen through literature, painting, singing, dancing, and computer-generated teaching through the internet. And this has dramatically increased over the last 50-some years. Enabling when you're talking about the first initiation, we're also talking about right living, particularly for a person who is soul aligned or soul infused. Due to the influence of the indwelling Christ spirit, the individual is able to create a life of right living, and he or she will, through soul urge, learn to clear away any limitations, such as addictions that prevent an awareness of the soul's thinking and impression. Addictions can be gluttony, avariciousness, overeating, gambling, and could be extended to how an individual conducts him or herself with others through practicing an attitude of tolerance and inclusiveness and eliminating prejudice and bigotry. Both are forms of prejudice to be overcome. This inner activity is healing addictions or activities contrary to the soul's nature and would initially involve reconciling the pairs of opposites. These tendencies are glamours and are related to emotional and lower 18 subplane mental desires focused through the astral body and the lower mental plane. By controlling one's physical desires and appetites, the individual will have completed a significant part of taking the first initiation and will have replaced or infused it with 25% soul consciousness. These percentages, 25%, is what GK or Alice Bailey defined in the Blue Books. So this purification, of soul consciousness, is redemption of the substance of the threefold nature: mental, emotional, physical. Sometime between the first and second initiations, the path of discipleship will have begun. Path of discipleship, remember, has to do with the fact that separation between the disciple and the mystic is the concept that the disciple wants to know what the energies and the forces are involved in his or her consciousness. The mystic does not necessarily want to know. He or she is involved in devotional activities, but they will eventually transform on the path of liberation. So the path of discipleship will eventually result in establishing a higher connection with the soul after a fusion of manas and buddhi, and after construction of the Antakarana has begun, as we mentioned before. This fusion will allow the higher spiritual will to flow and manifest, and eventually will result in initiation. So what would the first initiation look like on the physical plane for humanity? They would institute the principle of sharing versus selfishness and greed. This would be about the redistribution of wealth and about the control of the earth's resources. On a parallel note, this would involve a considerable shift in attitude about how capitalism functions through people and governments. In today's world, we're already seeing this happening through some governments and numerous relief organizations, or NGOs, for humanitarian relief, such as providing for the plight of refugees, education for women and for children. On an esoteric level, we see activities usually associated with greed and avarice, or the energies of the lower 18 subplanes being transferred to the solar plexus center and up to the heart and the throat. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
Nope.
All right. Reappearance of the Christ. In many of the blue books by Alice Bailey, she discussed the reappearance of the Christ. This is a central motivating theme for the New Global World servers and many religious groups who are helping to bring awareness of his imminent return and facilitate the unfolding of the plan. Reappearance of the Christ is a doctrine about the continuity of revelation of divinity to humanity. Service workers have been setting the stage for perhaps the most powerful subjective influence emanating from the coming world teacher, or as many of the great religions refer to as the coming one. Whatever the name, this is the same great being holding the office of the Christ. In different cultures and religions, he is referred to as the Imam Mahdi, the Lord Maitreya, the Messiah, or the world teacher. In theosophical writings, the Christ, or the Lord Maitreya, is an advanced and higher ranking member of the spiritual hierarchy. This great being oversees the evolution of humanity and represents a continual cycle of knowledge transfer about the nature of man's constitution and how he should properly exist in the world. With the Christ reappearance or appearance in the physical world and taking a body, he fulfills the role as the world teacher. This great being will appear along with the hierarchy of masters who are also set to externalize and help prepare humanity for a transition from a time of selfishness and fear to an era of cooperation and goodwill. GK said the Christ will be the harbinger of the age of Aquarius and will stand before humanity as the great exemplar of what a human being and the larger group called humanity can become. The ageless wisdom teachings tell us that the Christ never left the earth plane, but has been with us to return at a time which is ripe according to his choosing. Disciples of the ageless wisdom teachings accept the fact of his return and that it is a recognition of the continuity of revelation. And with that coming of the new age, the great teacher appears. The hierarchy and their service workers through the centuries have been working in what esoteric terms called isolated unity, or on the inner planes of the earth. This refers to the concept of working in the world, but not of it. They are now working on the mental plane of the average humanity with the purpose of dissipating any forms of glamours, illusion, distortions of reality through impression. However, the work of the Christ will be primarily on the astral plane, where he will form active groups that will work for unity, cooperation, and brotherhood in all departments of life in all countries. Here, the energy of human desire will be reoriented towards goodwill and cooperation and with the practice of right human relations. On the mental plane, he will overshadow to awaken a response to those who are in any way spiritually awakened and telepathically communicate to all disciples and initiates who are working in world affairs. Through these workers, he will have outposts of his consciousness in all nations. It is with the mass of people in every land from the grassroots level that the salvation of the world lies, and with them the preparatory work is already underway. In order for the plan to unfold and the reappearance of the Christ to happen, the hearts and the minds of the everyday person must have a certain amount of spiritual development to understand the intelligence of the plan. It should be understood that the Christ return is not predicated on him performing miracles or being a leader or a visionary. It is humanity that must become its own savior by realizing its own acts of humanitarianism, altruism, and sharing, and demands for honesty, truthfulness, and accountability in governments and all facets of civilization. Today, now in today's world, it is a matter for the disciples to help humanity in coordinating and engaging man's intelligence and free will to enact positive change. GK tells us that certain conditions and successful steps must be taken in the fields of religion and politics to improve right human relations, and that religious and political leaders must be held accountable for their actions and rhetoric. He also indicated that certain things must take place prior to the Christ's return. And these might be, or as a minimum, the principle of sharing must be enacted globally. There must be a redistribution of the wealth of individuals, groups, and resources of nations for the benefit of all humanity. This will result in a reorganization of the global economic system. There must be a cessation of war and creating a measure for lasting peace. Conflicts around the world, such as in Ukraine, North Korea, the ongoing Syrian civil war, the radical religious elements of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia must be resolved. In addition, the global arms trade and illegal sale of weaponry sold on the black market must be brought under control. There must be a reorganization of the major religions. This will require, for example, Christianity, which they've been doing in the last 20 years or so or more, addressing scandals and all concepts of separation, abuse, and division in their churches. Islam must take responsibility and be completely rein in the radical elements that are abusing women and perpetrating hatred and violence in numerous parts of the world. And Judaism and Hinduism must rein in all forms of separatism expressed and practiced through their religion. Comments? Anybody? Questions?
No, I don't see anything yet.
All right, let's continue. Science and religion. As was stated before in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1, GK states that Christianity and many other major religions, are primarily a religion of cleavage, demonstrating to man his duality and so laying the foundation for future unity. Through the lens of the illumined mind, such as the scientists, man will see all aspects of divinity hitherto unknown. And this statement could easily apply to all the major religions in their quest for bringing forth unity in brotherhood. Now, I will say that I am not a person who understands science really well. So what I'm going to do, or what I have here, I basically have different quotes that GK, Alice Bailey, made in the Blue Books regarding the connection between science and religion. The first quote that I'm going to be using was from Education in the New Age. And the urge to discover and to penetrate the secrets of God and of nature produced the scientist and the religious man. From Glamour, a World Problem. Much of the true revelation since the time of Christ has come to the world along the line of science. The presentation, for example, of material substance, scientifically proven, as essentially only a form of energy was a great revelation as any given by the Christ or the Buddha. It related energy to force, form to life, and man to God, and held the secret of transformation, transmutation, and transfiguration. The revelations of science, when basic and fundamental, are as divine as those of religion, but both have been prostituted to meet human demand. From Destiny of the Nations, another quote. Orthodox religion has temporarily separated the two great concepts of spirit and matter, producing a cleavage. In their thought and teaching, thereby pushing apart religion and science. The task of the New Age workers is to bring these two apparent opposites together to demonstrate that spirit and matter are not antagonistic to each other, and that throughout the universe there is only one spiritual substance, working out and producing the outer tangible forms. From Treatise in White Magic, the fact that spirit and energy are synonymous terms and are interchangeable. Only in the realization of this can we arrive at the reconciliation of science and religion, and at a true understanding of the world of active phenomena by which we are surrounded and in which we move. From a treatise in cosmic fire, all the planes of our solar system are but 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. It is the realization of this which will eventually unite science and religion. For what the scientist calls energy, the religious man calls God, and yet the two are one, being but the manifested purpose in physical matter of the great extra systemic entity or identity. And finally, making a connection between science and religion, Mary Baker Eddy, who was the founder of Christian Science, she said, Jesus of Nazareth was the most scientific man who ever trod the globe. He plunged beneath the material surface of things and found the spiritual cause. We'll move on to the science of invocation and evocation. We'll use the concept of prayer to demonstrate how invocation is used. We pray for peace to the Lord, loving God. You sent your only Son to show us how to live a life of love and compassion. This is taken from a Christian prayer. Here the individual is asking for something from someone. The something is always named, and the invocation is addressed usually to God or to a higher spiritual being who can intercede on their behalf. An invocation can have different qualities. The invocation by the individual can have the quality of, I know what I want to happen, and but I don't have the knowledge of how to solve the problem. The invitation can be tinged with emotion, such as a crying appeal or a plea. I'm desperately asking for X to happen. Or the invitation could also be what I'm calling a calm request. This can be asking for something to happen with a knowingness of what I want, but I want your higher being to help with the process. For the disciple esotericists, those practicing the science of invocation and evocation, this infers that an awareness of what's needed and what is desired is a driving understanding at the level of knowing. If the esotericist is mindful of the esoteric significance of the dynamics of invocation and evocation, he can be most effective in his service activity as he intuits the idea, then works toward concretizing it on the physical plane. In essence, he learns to turn the process, or this process, into a science where he consciously invokes and knows a response is forthcoming. We note that it is in reality the intelligent organization of spiritual energy and of the forces of love, which will evoke a response from spiritual beings, and who can establish a close communication between humanity and the spiritual hierarchy. With the scientific approach of invocation and evocation, trained disciples and aspirants learn to use certain words, mantras, and formulas as a focus, and thus give them right direction and power. This invocative work will be the keynote of the coming world religion, where the trained spiritual minded are accepting the fact of approaching energies, and which are focused by the higher spiritual entities. The use of the great invocation. For those who use the Great Invocation or are part of triangles, for example, they are using or demonstrating the qualities of evocation and evocation. From the Great Invocation, the word let is an invocative means for bringing forth the energies of light, love, and the will to good. Here, the individual invokes these thought forms through his consciousness, the energies of light and love and the will to good into the world. He then, acting as a conduit for those energies, evokes the same thought form energies into the world through the inner and outer planes. So we have from the Great Invocation, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. Let love stream forth into the hearts of men. Let purpose guide the little words, the little wills of men. Let the plan of love and light work out. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. These 6 directives from the Great Invocation demonstrate that these energies are actively invoked or brought into the world by the service workers or New Group of World Servers. This is directly helping to invoke the plan into manifestation and allow for man's awakening consciousness and the mind to be consciously expanded. This process allows the person, group, to make choices that affect lives greater than his own and begin to affect humanity on a planetary scale. This is a form of spiritual activism where the awakened individual and or group can now sense through clear seeing on the inner planes and with the intuition of what needs to take place for humanity to progress. Regarding invocation and evocation, we'll talk about divine approaches very shortly here. Through the developing science of invocation, man will call on or invoke an immanent God. A reciprocal process or evocation will result. The work of invocation will increase the power of a group work and will eventually lead to sacred festivals and ceremonies to be observed, such as around the new and the full moon, and spring festivals, spring spiritual festivals, such as the full moons of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, and which allows hierarchy and the Christ to come closer to humanity. I'll talk a little bit more about divine approaches more coming up. Spiritual festivals. Prior to a discussion about spiritual festivals, we are referencing previous information on the science of invocation and the reappearance of the Christ, and externalization of the hierarchy. GK specified that certain major festivals will be established around moon and strengthening the spirit of invocation. At that time, the focus of spiritually minded will be to direct the power of thoughts towards creating a unified and telepathic rapport between humanity with the hierarchy. Hierarchy's response would be in the form of evocation or a thought form or impression. And this thought form would act as an impact, carrying inspiration and revelation on consciousness. GK and/or Alice Bailey noted it in externalization of the hierarchy. Future spiritual festivals will be establishing a uniformity between already existing religious rituals, spiritual events, and holy days of the Christians, Buddhists, and Hindus, perhaps even people from Islam too. This will bring about a pooling of spiritual resources and act as a united effort toward an invocation for worldwide festivals. But GK indicates that there ultimately will become 3 main festivals, and these are the Festival of Easter. This is the festival of the living or risen Christ as a teacher. And at this time, he will be expressing and teaching the love of God, and that it is through the hierarchy that this message is conveyed. The time of the festival will be determined by the date of the full moon of Pisces as the beginning of spring, or that should be the full moon of Aries, actually. This festival will demonstrate the existence of the hierarchy as a second planetary center, invoking the love aspect of God at Easter. We have the festival of Wesak. This is known as the festival of the Buddha. Buddha is known as a spiritual intermediary between Shambhala and hierarchy. The Buddha expresses the wisdom of God and the embodiment of light and the indicator of divine purpose. The time of the Wesak festival will be determined by the date of the full moon of May or Taurus. The Wesak festival will be a time of acknowledging Shambhala as the first planetary center where the will of God, where the will is invoked and the purpose and the will of God is known. The last of the three festivals would be the Festival of Goodwill. This would be the festival at the spirit of humanity, aspiring toward God, seeking conformity with the will of God, and dedicated to the expression of right human relations. This will be a festival of deep invocation and appeal, in aspiration toward fellowship, human and spiritual unity, and culminating in representing the effect in human consciousness of the combined work of the Buddha and the Christ. It'll be a time for humanity as the third planetary center to invoke and express divine intelligence through the will to good. The time of this festival will be fixed at the time of the full moon of Gemini in June. Combined, these three festivals, although not yet related, would become part of a unified spiritual approach of humanity. GK notes that the remaining full moons would constitute the lesser festivals and would be recognized, would still be reorganized of vital importance. They'd be recognized of vital importance. These other festivals, they would establish divine attributes and characteristics in man, just as the major festivals establish the three major divine aspects. For example, the full moon of Capricorn in December would call attention to the first initiation about the birth of the Christ in the cave of the heart. There's a possibility of studying the labors of Hercules. This was the title of this book by Alice Bailey. She depicts Hercules as a disciple who, on the reverse wheel of the zodiac, must complete a different task every full moon and culminate in Pisces as the liberated initiate savior. The minor festivals would emphasize man's inner relation to the whole, thus lifting the divine presentation out of the individual and the personal into the universal divine purpose. Any questions or comments at this point?
Nope, we're good.
All right. Religious service and money. The need to serve is a concept and impulse that has evolved, particularly through people in religion over the last 800 years or so, due mainly to a new influx of light pouring down from subjective levels of consciousness. The new sense light has stimulated man's creativity and opened up his mind through the inquiry of initiating revolutions in culture, science, the arts, and politics, and brought humanity, the Renaissance, and the Age of Enlightenment. Although it was a time of great openings and new inventions and ways of being, this was nevertheless the era of the individual. This idea of the need or urge to serve, such as through helping people in need, was a very different concept or foreign concept to most people until very recent times. In the last century, it now manifests as a conscious activity. In the Ageless Wisdom teachings, it is known as love wisdom or intelligent loving. GK defines service as a spontaneous effect of soul contact, and based on the amount of integration and alignment of the lower three vehicles of the individual, then the soul's light and love will pour more easily through the personality vehicles, and service work would be rendered more effective. We understand that service is not an activity nor something which people must do. Service is a quality considered to be a demonstration of the life of the soul through the human personality on the physical plane. As the soul is naturally group conscious, it impresses the personality with the urge to serve, and the personality responds with the inner urge to cooperate by implementing activities to serve the group good. When this happens, the soul's light pours through the personality, sees this as an opportunity for expressing itself in the outer world. Due to his contact with the soul, he is motivated by the urge to group good. With a developing integration with the soul, he will be reflecting its greater values, such as through cooperation and goodwill, and a sense of personal responsibility. His intention ideally will not be trying to think out what needs to be done, but to hold an awareness of being of service at any moment in whatever he does. That could also be termed as being sensitive to impression in the moment. It is possible the server could be performing service for a service organization such as, for example, the Salvation Army, or a homeless shelter, a local food bank, or a community outreach organization. These are examples of a form of service, but the server's goal is not so much to be active in philanthropic or service organizations per se, but to be present and have the ability to hold the soul radiance with the soul's awareness as much as he can, regardless of where he's at in whatever he may be doing. In essence, it is the server's intent to express cooperation and goodwill. This alone will help to remove tensions and separations between people and holds the secret of how to create right relations between peoples. With this form of service, the server is allowing the livingness of the soul to move through his consciousness freely in whatever activity he is involved with. Now, regarding the use of money in service, workers in the field of religion see money as energy, ideally, and as a spiritual asset for manifesting spiritual, religious, and hierarchical activity. Through an intelligent and balanced approach, servers recognize the esoteric value of money for the purposes of service, as it is a recognition that money is a form of thought form energy. It is a question of how and where it is directed. When money is directed away from selfish pursuits, such as for the purposes of desire and greed, then money will be seen as genuinely serving man's needs and defining those conditions which will be to his spiritual and lasting benefit. Money must become transmuted to a real spiritual asset and responsibility to be seen for the purpose of the service of humanity and by extension used for hierarchical purposes. I'll talk a bit more about money and service when I get in May, when I talk about Seed Group 9, the financial services group. This is a piece I just put in here. Literally today, I just added this piece, the influence of religion in politics. Another point to emphasize is the influence of people of faith and or representing the teachings of various religions and how they influence other seed groups, for example, in politics. They are in effect bringing forth spiritual values and help shape conversation, understanding, and behavior in our world across multiple cultures and governments. Here in the United States, for example, the religious right has been influencing United States politics since at least the election of President Reagan in 1980. There's many examples of religious energies influencing people long before this too, but this is just in recent times. By electing people from city council all the way up to the president of the United States, they have shaped and influenced policies on abortion, women's rights, and what should be taught in the classroom, such as writing textbooks and what it means to be a Catholic or a Jew, to the White House, what it means to be a Catholic or Jew in the White House, to also about gun control debate, and many other issues too that could be related to religion. The major religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, at their core are very conservative in teaching. That is, that all men should be controlling society and women should be in subservient positions. Although all these views are changing and are in flux, this is basically a conservative view that spills over into the political, culture, and religious side of society. And I want to just include a quote here from the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace and Religious Nationalism. They said, I quote, "The widespread use of religiously inspired political appeals can be detected in places as diverse as Turkey, Latin America, Western Europe, and the post-Soviet states. For instance, in 2018, Costa Rican president runoff election, voters and also in the voters for evangelical populist candidate Federico Alvarado reportedly rallied behind the mantra, if a man of God can't govern us, then nobody can. In his recent successful bid for the Brazilian presidency, right-wing populist candidate Jair Bolsonaro similarly campaigned on the slogan, Brazil before everything and God above all. In Indonesia, meanwhile, Islamic nationalists allied with anti-Chinese xenophobes and economic nationalists to oust Jakarta's Christian governor, Purnama, and convict him of blasphemy and charges. So this is just a tiny little sampling of how there could be an influence of religion in politics. I'm sure most of you have many, many ideas going historically back hundreds of years, especially with the Catholic Church. Basically was a religious theocracy running political affairs throughout Europe for many centuries. And then just like Islam did with their particular version of religion through encountering Catholic energies too. So the energies are widespread throughout the last hundreds of years. And finally, what have the workers in the field of religion accomplished? There are some major accomplishments in the field of religion, such as with religious tension still existing in many places around the world, there are those who seek to create interfaith and ecumenical communication between the various religious groups, and indeed provide a moral and spiritual backbone to the community. This entails community involvement for learning about the nature and culture of people of the other religion. This helps to put a human face on people that have been differing beliefs and puts a stop to demonization and intolerance. In the cases of tensions between Christians and Jews and Muslims and other sects or faiths in the Middle East, skilled diplomats use conflict resolution as a means to get all parties to coexist in peace. And since World War II, this has met with modest and questionable results. For more than 100 years, people from all cultures have been inspired with many different religious and mystical teachings. For most people, their aim is to create a union between their personality and God, which organized religion does not satisfy. In this case, many have sought out other forms of mysticism. That is, they've left their religion and sought out other forms of mysticism. Other teachings may come from deeper relation to an organized religion, such as studying the Kabbalah, from Judaism, Sufism from mystical Islam, Buddhism, the teachings of Gurdjieff or Yogananda, Qigong, Theosophy, Science of Mind, and the Course of Miracles. Through study, meditation, and inner guidance, people's belief in God is moving into a space of direct knowing or gnosis. This is for some not just a revolt from authority, but causing a renewal in their religious faith, but to seek out another form of spiritual belief. On the ecumenical side, this refers to various Christian sects coming together. Interfaith refers to bringing together other faiths, such as through the Parliament of Religions. The inner spiritual is a movement that seeks to bring spiritual but not religious types together for seeing interconnections of all religiously inclined individuals and groups. And these are all causing a break from established tradition of church dogma, doctrine, theology, and a tendency towards self-determination and old barriers of thought and divisions between races and faiths. This is an experience of God immanent. Also, from these teachings, a person may directly know God or the higher self, as this would demonstrate the fact of God. And this all contributes toward the ultimate founding of the new group religion. For students of the Age-old wisdom and esoteric teachings, they are using techniques such as meditation, spiritual study, and service as a means toward reaching the goal of creating right human relations between individuals and groups via a soul connection. And the students of the Age-old wisdom are working towards enabling the first initiation, both for themselves individually and for humanity. They're working to employ the science of invocation and evocation, such as through the use of the great invocation and triangles. Disciples are working on their own individual glamours and practicing redemption of lower astral and their mental bodies. And they're employing methods of right thought form building. And they're celebrating spiritual festivals, and this allows disciples to come into an alignment with hierarchical purpose. That is all I have, which is quite a mouthful. Like I said, you are welcome to, after this this talk is polished and is posted to Makara, you're certainly welcome to listen to it again if you want to get deeper and into the what I just said for all the details, for sure. Are there any comments or questions as I close?
And I just want to say, for those of you who didn't find it in the attachment box, I put it in there way earlier. With the recordings, we will also have David's slides. So that makes it easier to go through and make notes and follow what he has packed. Because
packed,
these,
I typically pack, yes.
Well, these are such wonderful things that you're teaching us. And the thing among all the other things that you're pointing out to us is how one seed group does not stand alone. One person does not stand alone. One religion does not stand alone. It's the unity and how they're blending and working together that brings us into the future. So
yes, we are all interconnected
Thank you
and
for that.
interrelated. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Tanya says, thanks so much for your meaningful and inspiring teachings, making them practical and accessible to groups. And
Great.
of course, that means groups of other languages too. So, all right,
for everybody that's out there and listening, whether you're subjectively listening to it later, take these teachings to heart and mind and let other people know about them. Don't just keep it to yourself. Pass it around. This is the point of the ageless wisdom.
right. Okay, Jessica says, it seems that religion and politics have a natural overlap with the New World religion particularly. Political change seems would follow unity energy, so our political efforts will support religion and vice versa. Any thoughts?
Yeah, when I am not a religious person, although I have the religious spirit. You put it that way. That's why I put these things together the way I do. But the idea is that you can sit in a pew, or you can be in a mosque or a temple or whatever, and you can take on the energies of the devotional energies of the people around you, and you can sit and listen and be inspired. That is as a person who is largely mystical and devotional, but you can also be as the esotericist and observe how those energies, how the sermon, how the words, how the mantrams, the teachings, the chants are all influencing you, and how they are interacting with your consciousness. This is the great challenge that we have too. And this is how science, the science of invocation, right thought form building, understanding that thought is energy and that energy follows thought. I choose to direct this energy towards this and become this. And so therefore, I mentally, I intellectually, I on a knowing level, I know how to direct these thoughts. So it's much more than just emotional, and it connects with the concept of I go into politics, I'm a scientist, or I express through education. I do all these things with this mindset going on. I hold the religious concept, I hold the science, these sciences in my consciousness as I go out and express livingness and radiation of the soul into the world. I just naturally pack things together. Sorry, that just puts the whole thought form together there. So that's how they're connected. Absolutely.
And Dominique says, how can we convince mainstream Christians that the Christ had many incarnations in various religions, teaching the same principles?
Well, I would take those principles, those values, those understandings, those virtues also. You take those, how they're expressed in different forms, and condense those into the teaching of the local culture you're at in the moment, or the group you're with in the moment, and hold those and know that there's a similarity of all those with all those different values and understandings. And that's the essence. There's no real difference. There's only a difference in the personality, as a difference between a Church of the Nazarene versus a Catholic versus a Episcopal versus a Pentecostal, whatever. And then there's an interpretation of the Old Testament from the Jews and how they see it from how the Christians see it. And then there's an interpretation of how Islamic people see Jesus as a prophet. There's but the higher essence and understanding, the takeaway here is to focus on the higher values and the values of the teachings, and not the dogma or the theology, because that gets into the personality, the concrete mind, and then there's all sorts of intellectual back and forth, and that's is not necessarily agreed upon. It's the values that we treat each other equally is the most important concept that's really espoused by the Jesus, the Christ, or the Christ teaching. So.
And Jessica says, thank you.
No worries. Anytime.
Okay, that's all I see right now. So.
Okay, well, next month we will be talking about Seed Group 7, the scientific workers. And actually, we have 3 more to do. We have the scientific workers, Seed Group 7 in April. And then in May, we will have the people working in the field of finance and economics. And the last one will be the creative workers, Seed Group 10, known as also the Great Synthesizer. And I'll be talking about what the creative workers are and who they are and how they express, but I'm also going to be tying together how all the seed groups are interacting together. So that's something to look forward to also. So I hope to see you all at these different talks. Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Oh, sorry, I'm talking here.
No problem. No
I'm
problem.
I'm trying to give the schedule. So the next one will be on the 9th of April, and we're going to daylight savings time. So it will start at 7 p.m. GMT. Okay. For most of us, that means our local time will remain the same, but for a couple of you, it won't. But so 7 p.m. GMT on the 9th of April. And then the one in May that David was talking about, we're actually having that on the first Saturday of May. It'll be on the 7th. Typically, we have these on the 2nd. So a couple of little schedule changes here, but when I send the link for this particular recording, you'll see the schedule and the times, and we'll of course have the announcements. So
what is the BL? What is the date for the one in June?
The one in June will be on the 11th of June, which
Okay,
will be
great.
the second Saturday, again, our
Excellent,
normal,
good, okay.
our normal time.
Very
Okay, so thank you, everybody. And unless anybody else has anything else, I will close this webinar down.
Thank you for attending.
Bye, everybody.